Okay, welcome to Basic Folk, authentic, honest conversations with under-the-radar folk musicians. I'm your host, Cindy Howes. Woo! There's been a lot going on recently. You may have heard the news, that personal news. We'll just take a moment to shout out to personal news that I will be moving back to Boston in February, wrapping up my time at WYEP in Pittsburgh. I will become the new marketing and promotions manager at WERS at Emerson College, which is amazing. It's my old college radio station. Spent so many years there, and in fact, that's the radio station where I truly fell in love with this kind of music that we feature here on Basic Folk. So back to the roots, you could say. Today on Basic Folk, we have somebody who I was met when I was in college, and he's been kicking around the Boston scene for a while. His name is Mark Erelli, originally from Reading, Massachusetts. He is really interesting because he's has drama experience. He also has a really huge interest in science, and in fact holds a science master's degree. And he plays sideman to people like Lori McKenna, Paula Cole, Chris Delmhorst, Josh Ritter, and so on and so forth. He is also in the super group bluegrass band Barnstar, which is based in Boston and led by Zach Hickman, who is Mark's best friend. I wanted some help in preparing for this interview, so I called up my dad, who is a retired high school biology teacher, to sort of ask him some questions about, what are some things that I could possibly bring up with Mark in the interview. And here's what he had to say.
He's an evolutionary biologist, one that's ever been to the Galapagos. That's where Charles Darwin went some hundred or so years ago. Darwin wrote this famous book called On the Origin of Species in 1859.
Have you read that?
Of course not. It's going to be the foundation of evolutionary biology. And there was an important case about whether they could teach evolution in public schools. The Stokes trials.
This is in 1925?
Still argues today, so some factions are trying to prevent us from teaching evolution.
I think in the interview, I eventually get to this topic with Mark, and my dad was talking about Darwin on the Galapagos studying finches in our phone conversation, and I think in the interview I mentioned sparrows. It's whatever. It's the same kind of little tiny bird. Anyways, this is a long intro. And thank you for sticking with me. We're going to hear a clip of Mark Erelli right now. This is a really poignant song that Mark wrote back in 2015 about gun control. It's called By Degrees. And this new version that was just released features Roseanne Cash, Josh Ritter, Anais Mitchell, Lori McKenna, and Sheryl Crow. And the last verse is sung by Mark himself. And we're going to hear Mark's verse, and then we will get to our conversation with Mark Erelli on Basic Folk.
And I've seen sadness seep into my heart, each day a little more. This darkness growing so familiar, I can't recall what came before. My children's faces filled with questions, looking up expectantly, and I don't know what to tell them. No, I can't bring myself to tell them that you can learn to live with anything. When it happens by degree.
Well, thank you for talking to me, old friend.
Old? No, I'm
well,
joking.
I mean, like,
I'm long time.
Yeah. Like, I was thinking today that I think we haven't known each other since I was 18, but I went to Club Hassim in high school, and I think you were the first show I saw
wild.
As a teenager. I was 18, you were probably 19.
Yeah.
Right?
Of course.
And that's how I'll leave it. But I was reading up on you, and I hadn't really found a lot of information about your growing up. You grew up in Reading, Massachusetts.
I did, yep.
North Shore.
I guess, yeah. I didn't really think of myself as being near the ocean, but we were definitely closer to the North Shore.
Right, yeah. I'm from Walpole, Massachusetts, which is not South Shore, but it's like basically south of Boston and you're north of Boston.
Exactly.
Different worlds.
Yep. The
so-
Mason-Dixon line.
Yeah. So what was your family like growing up? I know your parents were teachers. Do you have any siblings?
I do. I have a younger sister, 3 years younger, Lauren. Yeah, my parents were both teachers. My dad was a high school teacher. My mom was a nursery school teacher. Grew up in Reading and went to the public schools there and was definitely like good student / tennis player / musical theater person. Kind of went across the communities, as it were, like theater and sports and science
Yeah.
and music.
Did you play tennis in high school?
I did, yeah,
So
all
it's
through
like
college and high school. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so you're in college too. It's like a career kind of.
It was a thing for a while. Yeah, I played at I guess you would say I played at like the national level through college and then
Did you win any awards?
I'm sure that I did, but I actually kind of blocked a lot of that stuff out.
Whoa.
I didn't really like a lot of the people playing tennis. I mean, I found friends and good people, but it was kind of a lot of kind of rich, entitled people, if you played
It's
kids.
not a salt of the earth game.
No, it is not. But I came from a very, that was my background in tennis, like kind of a scrappier, kind of lower income version of the game. Even though my tennis club that I was at Winton in Winchester, it was really shitty. I mean, it's probably the shittiest thing in Winchester, Massachusetts, which is otherwise a very nice town. So yeah, I did that for a long time.
And you were also in the drama club, musical theater?
Yeah, I did. I got kind of typecast as the Elvis character early. So I played the King and Joseph, and then I did Bye Bye Birdie, and I was the Birdie Elvis kind of character. So yeah, I got a little bit of the Elvis in me early.
I wanted to ask you about your evolution in singing, because you are known for having an incredibly high voice, but how did and very like powerful and very people like it, I guess.
Gosh, I hope.
How did musical theater help you with your singing style?
Well, it certainly helps with projection and directing energy kind of off the stage at the audience. And that was probably something I kind of maybe reined in. It can be very hard to sustain, and it was for a long time. It was really hard to go out and talk at a club or something and then do a gig, later that night or even the next day. And then if I did a show or two in a row, I'd just be like kind of laid out for a few days. So I felt like I wasn't really singing correctly. I did some voice lessons for a while, and then I started to really feel the benefits of that, but I also started to really hear it in my voice, like kind of unnaturally.
You mean like it was becoming more like school?
Yeah. It just sounded a
that's-
little bit kind of too what's the word? Intentional.
Right.
I don't really know how I did it, but I eventually got to a point where I was able to sing with the technique that was a little more control over the technique, but also not think about it so much. And I think that's just kind of what you do in any kind of artistic thing. Once you
Yeah.
get to a certain level, you master the technique enough so that it fades into the background.
It becomes artistic again.
Yeah, and so now I feel like that's kind of the point where I've been able to be for like the last 10 years, which is, it's only the last 10 years that I felt like I had a real control over it and could do it the way that I wanted to do it consistently.
Going back to growing up, how did music play into your early life? You're at like the perfect age for like the MTV generation.
Yeah, it was like right there. I feel like I was there to see the first video, but I remember watching Video Kill the Radio Star and like seeing the guy planting the MTV flag on the moon, and just thinking like, wow, this is really something new and cool.
It's like a shift in.
Oh yeah, total
music.
shift in consciousness, and just stayed parked in front of that TV. I was into it. I think by the time I hit middle school, I was starting to learn about the classic rock, but also simultaneously it was like the hair metal thing was the most popular
that's
stuff.
yeah,
Yeah,
unfortunate.
that was I'm not proud of that phase, but that was what there was. There's a lot of similarities between like the kind of blues crunch that you'd find in like Motley Crue. That's like very watered down version of like Led Zeppelin, you know. So you
Right.
start getting into Led Zeppelin, and then you start getting into the Stones, and once you kind of find the Allman Brothers and the Grateful Dead, it's like all of American music. It's all ready to be discovered and unearthed if you go digging. And that was just, whatever reason, that was the personality I had. So I would just, every time I heard them cover a song, I'm like, who wrote that? You know, and I'd go find tapes from that person. And because this was tapes. Every time a thread kind of pulled out from the fabric, I'd just kind of yank on it and see what else it led me to. And eventually that led me to, you know, people locally like Chris Smither, as opposed to the MTV people that seemed very just far away. They're in your TV, like they're famous, you know, like how would you ever meet those people or get close to them? Someone like Chris Smither was like playing in the Colonial Inn in Concord, you know, Massachusetts, and I could get there early and sit literally with my feet on the stage. So, you know, I was literally at his feet, like just watching his hands and watching what he was doing, just trying to figure it all out.
When listening to you talk about your like evolution of musical discovery, it sounds like you're an extremely curious person, which would help you out in a lot of different ways in music and then also possibly in science.
Sure.
Is that
yeah.
true?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. You have a master's degree in evolutionary biology.
Mm-hmm.
This is a big question, but what got you interested in science and what drew you towards that?
Well, I had a woods in like a conservation area in my backyard growing up. It was just, there was a rock wall in the back of the yard, and once you were over the rock wall, you were free. You know, you were in the woods, and it really was kind of that sort of thing where like, yeah, you could go out in the woods all day and your parents would just yell at the end of the day and until you heard them. And so I grew up just kind of mucking around in swamps and ponds and exploring and looking under rocks and logs to see, you know, what I could find. So I loved that kind of science. And then in high school, I had a teacher, a guy by the name of Leo Kenny, who taught at Reading High, and he was really into all the stuff that you would see under those rocks and logs, you know, salamanders and frogs and invertebrates, and he really exposed his classes to that kind of stuff within the framework of what he was obligated to teach us, and I just loved it. And he was also a huge Grateful Dead head.
That helps.
He would play bootlegs, you know, like during exams. He would put like, you know, the Ithaca, you know, mythical Ithaca set on in the background, like kind of, you know, just quietly while we played exams to kind of set the mood. And I just loved it. So I really, you know, connected with him, and I'd go over his house. He would give me bootlegs to copy, and he would give me other CDs by other artists that he thought I might like. And so I found a lot of music through Leo. And so he was kind of where the music and the science kind of came together. Wow. And I couldn't tease it apart for a while there. I couldn't decide which I liked more. So I just kind of did both. It got to the point after college where I had continued to do music, but it had really become like a love and a real strong urge. And I just thought, like, if I don't try this, I'll never forgive myself.
Try music, yeah.
I didn't know how to do it though, because I didn't grow up around any kind of artists in the suburbs. My advisor at college said you're going to need some kind of day job, and they pay you in science to go get your graduate degree. So you should get a graduate degree and take the money that you earn from a teaching or a research fellowship, and you know, you live off that and you do your music, you know, on the side until you get your degree, and that way you have a degree. And so that's what I did. I went to UMass Amherst, did music and science, and got paid to do that. And each one funded the other. And by the time I got out of there, it was like, I could see the path that like PhD, and then beyond that is like either like, you know, the tenured professor path or like the teaching biology and following in Leo Kenny's footsteps, which is definitely what would have happened if I didn't try music. You know, I would have just been the flannel shirted, bearded professor that like plays Neil Young and Chris Smither covers at the student open mics, you know, on whatever campus. But there was still that little voice in my head that's like, you know, if you don't try it, you're going to regret it.
Did you ask a lot of people for advice at that time?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Everyone. I mean, I booked, I was in charge of a concert series at Bates where I went to college. And so I would just, you know, I booked Smither, I booked John Gorka, I booked Greg Brown, Erica Wheeler. And it was just, I mean, a lot of folks, the Nields. I brought a lot of people to Bates. And, you know, I would sometimes open for them. I would drum up, you know, interest on campus and fill the rooms for them. And then afterwards, I'd show them to their little on-campus apartment. And invariably, they'd be like, do you want to come up and hang? And I'm like, yeah, sure, you know. So little did they know I was just about to interrogate them and give them the third degree about, how do I know? How do you do this? How do you know if you're supposed to do this? And I just remember Greg Brown, God bless him. He just, because he has a background in forestry. And so he kind of got a little bit where I was coming from. And he just said something to the effect of like, you're going to know. You're just going to know. You're not going to be able to not do it. And boy, was he right. You know, it was like, it wasn't necessarily an epiphany. Every point where I had the chance to choose between music or science, I chose music. And after a while, it's like, oh yeah, we're doing this. 20 years in, I guess I'm still doing this.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I heard you on a podcast. You're like, yeah, I think it was last year. You're like 19 years and I'm still trying to do it.
Still trying, you know, I mean, trying to make it rain. Yeah.
Yeah. My dad he's a retired biology teacher. So I was calling him today and I was like, I'm going to interview this folk musician who has an evolutionary biology degree. So can you tell me about evolution? And so he started talking to me about like Darwin and the sparrows and the Galapagos and everything. And then he mentioned a couple of times about certain religious groups not believing in evolution. Like, evangelicals. And he brought up the case in 1925.
The Scopes trial?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The substitute teacher got in trouble for teaching evolution in Tennessee. But it just made me wonder and you can be like, pass, don't want to answer this question, what your experience with religion was like growing up and what it's like now.
I was raised Catholic. I never liked it. It seemed a little bit like, how could these folks possibly have the monopoly on the right way to live your life? I mean, it just seemed like fairly basic golden rule stuff. And but I got confirmed. The confirmation process was what finally drove me from the church, because I had a conflict with a very big high school history competition thing where I had to go to DC and represent my school, and I couldn't go to the retreat. You know, we went in and met with the priest and said, you know, can he go do a retreat somewhere else? You know, or no, or can he do a longer, like, overnight retreat to kind of make up? And no, it has to be here. And honestly, it just soured the entire family.
Wow.
Yeah, my parents never went back to church after that. My wife had a really positive experience in the Catholic Church growing up. She had a very progressive congregation, and that, you know, I know they do a lot of great stuff. But for me, I ran from it. As my wife says, you know, for someone that like ran from the church, you sure do write a lot about Jesus and have like, you know, kind of very kind of Christian imagery, I guess, at some point. There's a reason that they're hard to dislodge, you know?
Yeah, the foundation is there.
Yeah, so I don't go to church anymore. We do belong to a Unitarian church, trying to give my kids a little bit of extra family morality. But I have a hard time going to the Unitarian Church mainly because I work there, with all the coffee houses. Like, it's just, there's times when I've done a church coffee house and then the next morning, like 8 hours later, I'm sitting in a Unitarian church. And a lot of the sermons or whatever they call them, they're literally my songs. It's like passing through, I've heard in sermon form. They didn't say it wasn't my song, like it wasn't based on my song.
Wait,
but
is it just the same theme?
It's just the same theme.
All right,
it's
they're
just
not, like
I was
plagiarizing.
just singing about this
okay.
in another Unitarian church 8 hours ago, and now I'm here listening to it back. They're wonderful people, and their politics and their morality line up 100% with mine, and I do not want to go because I don't like to join things. I'm not like a group joiner person. I don't want to identify as a Catholic or a Unitarian. I'm Mark.
So, I feel like we could talk about this particular topic forever.
Mm-hmm.
And I definitely had more questions about that, but I also have
This is just seltzer. We're gonna need something.
I know. I'm gonna get the hard stuff in here. It doesn't sound like, one more question about this and then we'll move on. It doesn't sound like going to church connects you spiritually to something larger than yourself. But
no.
But what does?
Nature. Because church is just other people. And people are great. I like people, but I'm also an introvert. So for a long time, I thought that meant that you just didn't feel comfortable around people, which I couldn't figure out because I'm on stage in front of people all the time, and I feel very, very comfortable. So I was like, how is this possible? But I read somewhere the definition of introversion is not that you don't like people. It's just that you don't get energy from being around people. It flows out of you. Extroverts, they feed on that stuff and they get energy from those interactions. Introverts are fine with those interactions up to a point, and then after that point, they feel depleted and exhausted, and they just need to be alone. And that's me. Everything made sense once I learned about that and heard it phrased that way. So half hour after the gig, I'm talking to people that came, and I'm very grateful, and I'm really excited to hear, what they thought of the show and meet them. And literally after the last person leaves the room, I'm done. I could be in bed in 10 minutes, asleep. I'm just done. But so, people up to a point are great. And after that, it's just exhausting. Mm-hmm. Nature, on the other hand, I could do that all day. That to me is really where something bigger than myself and bigger than humans is plainly obvious. And it's just, it's a miracle. I don't even know what other word to use. We're not even solid. We're just little waves of electricity vibrating around super fast, at our most basic atomic level. And how is that even possible? Whether it's the creepy crawlies or whether it's, the more charismatic megafauna or whether it's a landscape, that to me is just the stuff that really kind of unplugs me and makes me feel, that kind of reasserts my proper place in the universe,
Yeah. What's your favorite place to go in nature? Whether it be you've been there one time or you go there many times.
Well, there's a couple ways that I like to do it, because there's something that really special that happens from walking and being in an environment that you've known your whole life and seeing how it changes or doesn't change. And that's what I have now. Where I live back in the greater Boston area, and so I'm walking through the same woods that I grew up in some cases the exact same forests, with my kids, and they think that I'm just I know everything. They point to something, I'm oh yeah, that's woodbine, or no, that's not poison ivy. It looks like woodbine, but it's not. And they just think I know everything, but those are the places that I've walked around in my whole life. And so that's a very deeply kind of spiritual thing. But out west is a whole other thing. I've always had a fascination with out west, and took the family out to Utah a couple of years ago, and my wife said, like, I've just never seen you like this. You're just like a kid. You're just wide open. You're just in awe. And I'm like, yeah, look at this. It makes no sense. It doesn't look anything like anything I grew up with.
It looks like outer space.
Yeah, it just looks like, how could this be possible? And so I find out in the American West to be a very kind of spiritual place, just to walk around in and just to be. And so yeah, I find that sense of something bigger than me and something infinite through nature. And humans are great, but it's pretty hard. It's pretty hard to find that with other people.
I want to talk about your friendship with Lori McKenna.
Oh, great.
Yeah. How did it begin, and how did it evolve into a musical partnership?
It's really funny because sometimes you have really great friends and you can't remember exactly the circumstances, but Lori and I remember the first time because we both lost a songwriting competition together. I was still in college, or I had graduated maybe. I don't remember the month it was, but I remember the day because we were playing the finals in the Borders bookstore in downtown Crossing, and Lori had got a babysitter for her kids and come up, and I had come down from Lewiston, Maine, where I was in school, and we all played, and the judges judged, and we both lost, and we were like, oh, sorry, better luck next time, or we're the losers, by the way, I'm Mark and I'm Lori, and then she went back to her family, and I drove back to Bates to open a show for the Neilds, who were playing on campus that night. But it wasn't until Bittertown that when she made that record, and she made it with guys that weren't touring with her, that when it came time to do shows, they needed some guy to do Kevin Barry's guitar parts and Duke's guitar parts, or at least approximate them. And I had been
because those guys don't tour.
Well,
generally.
they were touring with Mary Chapin Carpenter,
Okay,
and
gotcha.
kind of bigger artists. And so I had done a little bit of sideman work with Chris Delmhorst and Katie Curtis. So I just started working with Lori a little bit here and there. I just kind of stayed around, and then the songwriting thing really took off for her, and kind of reinformed her artistic stuff, her own career, and I was still in the band for all that. So, at this point, I'm kind of the only one that's been there for the entire ride and the entire thing, and seen the whole arc from kind of awkward mom from Stoughton with bangs and a sweater, on stage to superstar.
So let's talk about writing.
Okay.
What inspired you to first start writing, and does that remain true for you now?
I think it was just wanting to follow in the footsteps of the people that really moved me.
It also just must feel so good to have that voice that you have, and then just to be able to get your feelings out in that form.
Sure. Yeah, that still kind of surprises me. I'll still write a song and think wow, where the hell did that come from? And then I'll actually pay attention and show up for my life at some point and be oh, that's where that came from, It's it really is a way of helping me process and be in the world. And I don't know what I would do without that outlet. I mean, I guess I would just cover the songs by the writers that inspire me, and kind of borrow their voice for a while, and it would feel, it would inevitably make me feel a little better. But I am really grateful that I can do it.
Yeah.
In my own voice.
For sure. And you mentioned paying attention, which I think is like one of your greatest qualities
Thanks.
as a writer. And I think it's something that other people catch on to. I found this quote: "He approaches each of these varied roles, your producer, songwriter, sideman roles, with a belief in the transformative power of paying attention. What worth do you see in a person who pays attention, and how did you develop that skill of paying attention? Did you have one of your family members have that skill?"
No, I think that was from science, honestly, because that's what that's what science is. It's observation and questioning and seeking. I mean, that's why every time someone says, "Oh, you were a scientist and now you're a musician," I'm like, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Exact same thing. I don't really see much of a difference other than I don't have tenure in what I do. I can be fired. But I guess I can't be fired from my gig because I'm my boss.
Right.
But
if you fired yourself, that would be hard.
Yeah. Lori could fire me. Please don't, though. But yeah, I just I think that's a science thing, that kind of the faith in paying attention and where that will lead you, and how it's really exciting. I just love it.
Have you heard of the book The Artist's Way?
Oh yeah.
Yes,
I read that early
book.
on.
Yeah.
Is that Julia Cameron or something?
Julia Cameron, yeah. I own it and haven't read it, as artists tend to do. But my friend posted this quote the other day, and I wanted to know what you thought about it. It's from the book. It's: "The quality of life is in proportion always to the capacity for delight. The capacity for delight is the gift of paying attention."
Yeah. I mean, I would say yes. I mean, you know who's really good to read in that respect is Annie Dillard. Like
I've heard. Yeah, I've heard that.
She wrote a book called Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, and a lot of her stuff is just amazing. But that book was like a watershed moment for me, where she's in this little Tinker Creek property, and she's like she makes a pilgrimage out there every day, basically, and she's searching for something and looking at all the scales of resolution, the changing of the light and the sky over the mountains, and the bugs in the creek under the water, so it just seems so rich and interesting, and everything is, the more you pay attention to it. I mean, I'm sure there's people that listen to Bob Dylan and think like, oh, it's all the same. It's just some guy whining and he can't sing.
And harmonica.
Yeah, and some of that stuff, I understand why they would say that. But if you pay attention, there's different periods, there's different, kind of modes of approaching his craft that he uses, and it becomes all of a sudden this really amazing kind of thing. And I think it's the same thing with anything. I'm not like a fan of rap or classical music, or like fiddle music. Like, to me, all that stuff sounds the same. However, if I pay attention to it, it starts to sound different. I did like a little classical listening experience one time where someone led me through, 7 or 8 different pieces and kind of did like a guided kind of listening thing, and I could, all of a sudden I was like, oh yeah, Clair de Lune does not sound like Beethoven. It's very different. But if you just kind of don't pay attention, everything looks the same.
Yeah.
And it's easy to dismiss.
Well, I'll read Annie Dillard and you listen to Kendrick Lamar.
All right. So yeah, perfect.
Done deal.
Know.
We'll meet back here in 1 year.
Okay.
I wanted to ask you, I was really interested in talking to you about masculinity. Is that all right?
Absolutely.
How would you define masculinity, and how do you relate to it?
Wow, that is a tough one, especially these days. I didn't grow up with like a very Marlboro Man kind of view of masculinity. Thank God. So, and I was also raised full on Catholic guilt and fear. So like, you know, if you had one drink, you would be an alcoholic. If you had sex one time, someone was going to get pregnant and your whole life was going to be ruined. A very simplistic, kind of fearful, guilt-ridden philosophy that I kind of resented for a long time. Now I'm in a way almost weirdly grateful for it, because I look back and I'm like, I wasn't like an asshole guy who believed he was entitled to everything and could treat people the way he wanted to, because everything was his already. He just had to take it, and you had to give it to him, whether it was, you know, critical accolades or you know, awards or you know, yourself if you were a female. You know, like, I had girlfriends and all that stuff, but I was always far more timid because of the way that I was raised. And so for a while I was like, man, you know, I guess I could have had a little bit more fun and enjoyed my youth a little bit more. But at the same time, like, I look back and I'm like, when faced with any kind of situation, I always kind of was like, well, I'm going to be a little more conservative about this here, because I don't really know what's happening. I never like was the guy that was like, I'll tell you how it's done, you know. Yeah. And that's kind of feels like basically the entire problem with the world as we know it now, is that there's a lot of guys saying, this is how you do it,
right?
You know. And I've never had that. At times I wish I had a little bit of that swagger, and through some parts of the music I feel like I've connected with that. Like, once I met Zach Hickman, who has a lot of that and is also a very respectful man, but through the bluegrass stuff that we did with Barnstar, I've kind of connected with a little bit of that, you know, kind of more primal kind of Band of Brothers thing. So, you know, I have a bit of a complicated relationship with what I see as the general definition of masculinity, and I don't feel like I exemplify that really, you know, in the same way. And at the same time, I'm raising two boys. We have two young boys, so I think about that a lot. Because for years, I was like, when we have kids, like, I want a girl. And I don't know why I thought that, because I don't know anything about girls still. But what that was a little bit of residual fear, I think, from like not knowing, like, what if I don't know what to tell the boys? Because I didn't know growing up, you know, like, what if I don't know? Guys are supposed to know. You know, especially if they have sons, like,
but that sounds like guys aren't supposed to be vulnerable.
Yes, exactly.
But
exactly.
But it's actually, humans are vulnerable.
Sure. Yeah. I obviously don't ascribe to that, but, you know.
But I can understand, like, the pressure of, like, wanting to be like a bro or like a Superman or a cowboy or something. You know,
yeah. One of those.
The world expects you to be that, and you're like actually not that.
Yeah, I know. So it is kind of it's a process, you know. I mean, I definitely think all the time about how to teach them to find their own definition of what it means, like, to be a boy, or to, you know, to grow up and be a man. And I feel like I'm constantly challenging myself on that. Until, you know, not counting my work with Josh Ritter and with the Bluegrass Band, which is all guys, all my bosses have been females. I mean, Katie Curtis, Chris Delmhorst, Paula Cole, Lori, you know. I see and recognize the, like, male-dominated music industry, but that has not been my personal experience. Most of my life has been working in service to female artists and their art, and it's been great. But I didn't even realize that until recently. Like, when I would go on the road with male artists, and all of a sudden I'm like, are we gonna stop to go to the bathroom at any time? It's like,
when are we gonna shower again?
Yeah, you know, it's like I just came up with, like, a whole different thing, you know. It's funny, like, touring with Jeffrey Folkhall, I think that was the first time where I was like, oh right, yeah, I'm on the road with a guy.
Oh yeah,
you know?
I found a funny quote from you about like your collaboration with Jeff. You're like, we're guys, so we're not normally inclined to spend a lot of time talking or mapping out like the different parts that you sing together.
Yes.
I just thought that was like really interesting because Jeff definitely, I don't know him like super well, but he definitely seems like a, brooding, dark.
I think
man.
that's a big part of him. I mean, he's also the warmest, friendliest, funniest, guy I know. But we have our thing, our size that we show, are comfortable showing the world, and that's not necessarily as artists who we are as people. And I think it's maybe a little bit closer for me than some artists, but even I, like the guy in my songs, like I really want to be that guy. I am not.
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, I fall short of that example of like his tolerance and his patience and his acceptance and his compassion and his empathy. I mean, I want it, and I keep writing it in hopes that I'm capable of living up to it. But you write as an artist, there's an ideal that you're kind of working with, sometime an archetype, and
it sounds like a good practice though.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like the going back to geometry or whatever, it's the asymptotic line, with the curve. It's like you got your X and Y axis, right? And you got that curve that kind of stretches between one quarter of the axes there, and the line.
My dad is gonna love this.
Oh
podcast.
Yeah, I'm geeking out hardcore, but there's a point here that curve approaches the asymptote, but it never touches it. Oh. You extend it to infinity, and it always gets closer, but it never touches it. And that to me is like, that's my art in my life. Like, I don't think I'll ever get there. I will never touch the line, but I will never stop trying to get closer to it. And I think anytime I see someone that feels like they have touched the line and they stop, and I'm not surprised, and I don't feel like they're searching or striving, it's invariably less interesting. Whether you're listening to their music or trying to have a conversation with them at a party, like those kinds of things those kinds of people are dead ends. I don't ever want to be that, and we don't want that from our artists or our friends. We always want to be like trying to get better. So, I don't think any of the people that I've worked with, they're different people than they are as artists. It's not a contrived thing the way that it would be with like a like a Madonna or a David Bowie or someone who's like consciously putting a different, very different image out there, persona out there. Oftentimes as folk singers, our personas look suspiciously like us, but you have to hold a little bit back for yourself just so that you have like a little bit of a personal life that's not, for everybody else. But that said, I feel like there's not a ton. There's a little bit. My folk singer persona, for lack of a better word, as I understand it, is just like a nicer version of me.
Yeah, that's my persona too.
Right.
My radio.
There you
persona.
go.
Yeah, it's a nice version of me.
Yeah. Well, who wants to interact with the asshole version of me?
Right.
Nobody.
Man, well, this has been great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Really fascinating conversation.
Yeah, we should do volume 2 sometime.
All right, 1 year from today.
Oh, we may have to live a little bit more. We may have to do volume 2 in 10 years.
Okay. Yes. Good point. We'll live our lives because we're so young.
All right, and in 2028.
Okay.
Let's talk.
All right, great.
Okay.
Thank you, Mark.
It's a deal.
Okay, that's it. The interview with Mark Erelli. Thank you to Mark for taking the time to sit down. Also want to say thanks to Janelle Gutierrez, my web designer. Thank you to Alexander Stanton of the Pittsburgh band Townspeople, and thanks to Laura McCarthy for production support. I'm going to keep on trying to post once a week for Basic Folk because I do have some pretty exciting interviews in the backlog, but, things get crazy and I'm moving from one state to another, so we will see what we can do. In the meantime, though, you can re-listen to all the past episodes because they've been pretty awesome, and I also will have some show notes posted at my website, cindyhouse.net, and hopefully we will see you next week on Basic Folk. Bye!